it's not the same story, it's not the same characters, and therefore it needs visual evolution.
Instead of an introductory tour through the houses of Westeros and foreign lands, the viewers learn about the Targaryen bloodline. A red river runs so quickly that it's hard to identify every sigil and its details. Although they aren't named, it's possible to make out which symbol represents which character. The sigils go from Aegon the Conqueror and lead all the way to Rhaenyra. And if Rhaenyra's symbol looks familiar, that's because it's the exact same design of interlocking swirls as on the necklace given to her by Damon. The two Targaryens have a complicated relationship, and eagle-eyed fans might have noticed that the necklace often shows how close they are at that specific moment. We'll talk about it more a bit later. And now let's move on to the Easter egg that ties Game of Thrones and its spin-off more explicitly: Nymeria references. We first heard this familiar name in House of the Dragon Episode 1. Then, Alicent quizzed Rhaenyra on Queen Nymeria's history. For many viewers, it was a heartwarming throwback to Arya Stark's direwolf, who was named after the warrior queen.
Nymeria, gloves.
But in the third episode of the show, Nymeria pops up again, although this time the reference is less obvious. While rebelliously avoiding court in the Godswood, Rhaenyra is listening to her favorite song on medieval repeat. That is, asking her personal minstrel to play the same piece of music again and again. The ballad opens with the lines, "She fled with her ship and her people, her heart broken for those," and then Alicent's arrival cuts the song off. However, it tells us enough to assume that it's about Nymeria. The mythic queen led her people on an exodus across the seas along the river in Essos. After many tragic attempts to find a safe place to live, 10,000 ships finally arrived in Dorne. There, Nymeria burned the ships and wed Mors Martell. And all that was accomplished under the dragon's eye. That is, while the Valyrian Empire was still at its height. Obviously, Rhaenyra finds the story quite inspiring. But what is also interesting is that there's another Game of Thrones spin-off in development called 10,000 Ships. Next, we'll talk about a rare metal that Game of Thrones proved was more precious than gold: Valyrian steel. It's hard not to notice the sword wielded by Damon Targaryen. The Dark Sister once belonged to Visenya, Aegon the Conqueror's sister wife. A great warrior, she used it during the War of Conquest, and we know that it's still remembered almost 200 years later. Arya Stark mentioned it to Tywin Lannister when she was pretending to be a servant.
She had a Valyrian steel sword she called Dark Sister.
Daemon is definitely proud to own this legendary weapon. He even presented a trinket to his niece, saying that it is like Dark Sister. By the way, did you notice that since then Rhaenyra always wore that necklace? At least until the rogue prince stole the egg meant for her late brother's cradle. But let's move on to an even more prominent weapon. Every GoT fan remembers the Valyrian steel dagger that Arya used to kill the Night King with. And now it's in plain sight again, as it belongs to King Viserys. In Game of Thrones, the dagger made several key appearances throughout its 8-season run. In Season 1, the assassin used it to try and murder Bran. There was a lot of speculation about whom the dagger belonged to, such as Tyrion or Littlefinger. In Season 7, Littlefinger gave it back to Bran, and he gave it to Arya. She then used the blade to kill the Night King. So now it seems that the cat's paw dagger has made it all the way from Aegon I to Arya Stark, fulfilling part of the prophecy. Speaking of which, Targaryen Dreamers. Episode 1 ended with a bombshell revelation regarding Aegon the Conqueror's dream of White Walkers. This changes the whole viewpoint of the events of Game of Thrones, right? However, that wasn't the first or the last time the Targaryens saw the future in their dreams. One of them prompted the House of the Dragon to move to Westeros. According to legend, Daenerys Targaryen foresaw the doom of Valyria in a prophetic dream. Only 12 years later, it all came true, and the ancient kingdom was destroyed in a massive volcanic eruption. That meant the Targaryens were the only surviving dragon lords, and when all hope of bringing the powerful beasts back seemed to be gone, Daenerys learned how to hatch the dragon egg. Alyssa wanted to travel, and when Rhaena refused to fund her voyage, she stole 3 of Dreamfire's eggs. Those eggs were never seen again. But it's quite possible that Alyssa sold them in Pentos, and years later, they were given to Daenerys as a wedding gift. Next, we're going to talk about one character whom fans were definitely amused to meet. But first, check this out. Visit our awesome merch shop. We have branded t-shirts, hoodies, eco bags, and even phone cases. You can choose between dozens of unique and awesome designs. Click the link under the video and find your perfect match. The Golden Lions. Many familiar house names were mentioned in the first episodes of House of the Dragon. Rickon Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and House Dondarrion were all mentioned during the selection for a place in the Kingsguard. And we also met this era's golden-haired Lannister twins. Tylan seems to be the more serious of the two, while his pompous brother Lord Jason is bold enough to try to woo Princess Rhaenyra with talks about the beauty of Casterly Rock. Both characters are played by the same actor, Jefferson Hall. Amazingly, he appeared in Game of Thrones too. Hall played Sir Hugh of the Vale in 2 episodes of Game of Thrones Season 1. It was a relatively minor role, so no need to be frustrated if you can't quite picture him. But we still want to remind you of his story. Sir Hugh was Jon Arryn's squire who was killed by Gregor Clegane during the tournament. Ned Stark suspected that Hugh was involved in Lord Arryn's death, and Varys later admitted this, and that the Lannisters ordered him killed to prevent him talking. We'll see if Jason and Tyland are going to be as ambitious and hungry for power as their descendants. And speaking about the scheming lords of Westeros, we can't help noticing some similarities between the events of both shows. The dangers of hunting. George R.R. Martin once confessed that King Robert's hunting scene in Game of Thrones was his least favorite moment of the show. It turns out the showrunners had to make adaptation choices to fit their tight budget. So the royal hunting wasn't at all like the medieval party Martin originally imagined. For example, in many scenes of the first seasons, a few characters were simply talking in rooms instead of being part of expensive scenes of celebration, ceremony, or battles. Fortunately, Martin's vision was brought to life in House of the Dragon. It is almost a perfect echo of Daenerys' arrival at Dragonstone at the end of Season 6. And that is hardly a coincidence. The Game of Thrones episode was directed by Miguel Sapochnik, who's now the co-showrunner of the prequel series. Sapochnik probably chose to bring back the sequence as an Easter egg for fans, or as a reference to his favorite moment from GoT. Rhaenyra arriving at King's Landing also focuses on the similarities between the two characters. The silver-haired dragon-riding Targaryens have a lot in common. As both Dany and Rhaenyra grew older, they began to understand the way of the world. However, they both want to break the wheel, each in their own way. Daenerys learned that if a woman wants power, she must take it by any means necessary. Rhaenyra is only beginning to fully understand the political world around her. But let's get back to the visual Easter eggs provided by Miguel Sapochnik. House of the Dragon Episode 3 gave us the first big battle of the show. As amazingly shot as it is, the battle also has several quite straightforward references. Just have a look at Daemon avoiding arrows while running. It calls to mind Rickon Stark's death scene, which started the Battle of the Bastards. Lenore Valyrian's arrival on the back of the dragon echoes the Knights of the Vale's last-minute pop-up which saved the day. And most of all, Daemon going straight for Crabfeeder is reminiscent of Jon going straight for Ramsay. We at OSSA feel like there will be tons of other Easter eggs hidden in House of the Dragon's future episodes, and we'll be here to tell you all about them. If you liked this video, support OSSA by sending a super thanks. Just click on the thanks button under the video and choose an amount to donate. Stay awesome, and remember, we value each one of you.